The critical minerals we need tomorrow are in the ground in British Columbia today. What we need to do to ensure BC is a part of the supply of these essential minerals is to move with pace and certainty in exploration, permitting, and proving the ore bodies in the ground are substantial and financially viable. Exploration and discovery are an essential part of Canada's sovereignty, industrial defense strategy, and national objectives. Access to exploration is changing due to DRIPA legislation requiring consultation with First Nations. How those changes will unfold remains to be seen. Key to this moment in the developing world of critical minerals is to be in line with market demands. Delays in the overall process threaten the province's ability to realize the generational opportunity that both environmental and geopolitical factors are offering. Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Conversations Live at AME's Roundup. Today, we come to you from Kemkemale, the land of many maples. These are the traditional homes of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations who have lived on and continue to call these lands home. Osiem. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series that seeks to advance our understanding of the big issues of our times. Our goal is to share ideas and insights that help each of us gain a greater understanding of our communities, our province, our country. We're live in person and, of course, live on the Vancouver Sun, Conversations Live, and on LinkedIn. Now, one little bit of business here. For anyone in the room or who is online wishing to submit a question to our panel, please go to slido.com, enter the code Conversations Live, and send in your question. And I will then receive your questions up here on the podium, and then I'll share them with the panelists where I can. And even though I may not deliver your question verbatim, I'll be motivated by your thoughts, and they will help to shape some of my questions this evening or this afternoon. Our topic this afternoon is the vital role exploration plays in the continuum of mining in British Columbia. To say the sector is under stress is true. The rules are changing, the costs keep rising, and the impact on exploration is negative. The number of claims dropped in 2024 and declined even further in 2025. The reason primarily is uncertainty and the layering on of additional approval processes. Exploration and discovery are an essential part of Canada's sovereignty, industrial defense strategy, and national objectives, and they are key to BC's economy. Key to this moment in the developing world of critical minerals in British Columbia is to ensure that the province is in line with market cycles. Delays in the overall process threaten the province's ability to realize the generational opportunity before us. We have an exceptional panel, as you can see here today, who are going to dig into the opportunities and the challenges. Todd Stone, he's the president and CEO of the Association for Mineral Exploration. Cindy Collins, Vice President of Growth, Americas at Capital Limited. Joe Mazumdar, he is the editor of Exploration Insights. Grant Carlson, Fuse Advisors, and the great Lana Eagle of the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum. And as always, before we get started, we have a poll from Mario Canseco of Research Co. with the results of a poll that we asked him to conduct on British Columbians' thoughts on our ability to realize this golden moment in mining. Arav, can you please roll Mario's poll?
At a time of economic uncertainty and increased interest from international markets, just over 4 in 5 British Columbians believe that expanding mineral exploration is essential to Canada's economic growth, energy transition, and national security objectives. Residents of all regions of BC understand the significance of the mining sector at this moment. Residents of British Columbia are not particularly happy with the way mineral exploration is proceeding. Only 42% believe Canada is very or moderately competitive on this file when compared to other leading mining jurisdictions. And almost 3 in 10 consider the country not too competitive or not competitive at all. The skepticism over the way this issue is being managed is also observed on a separate question. Just over 2 in 5 BC residents feel the policies implemented by the federal and BC governments have been effective in supporting a strong and sustainable mineral exploration sector. Majorities of respondents feel neither level of government is doing enough to help this industry flourish. The effect of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, or DRIPA, is also felt in the mining sector. Practically 3 in 5 BC residents say they are very or moderately concerned about the implementation of DRIPA affecting mineral exploration project timelines across the province. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from ResearchGo.
Well, thank you, Mario. So, to the panel. Lana, top of mind and top of the agenda are First Nations relations. I think everyone agrees positive and strong relationships with First Nations are essential. In light of the uncertainty right now with the processing of claims, how do we keep in mind the essential need for prospectors and First Nations to work together?
Hi, everyone. I think at the core of working together is actually taking the time at the initial stages and throughout the project to build relationships. Now, for some people, they may roll their eyes and think, well, time is money, and it takes time to go to the site and to talk to nations, to build those relationships, and further, to present opportunities for procurement, for entrepreneurship, for training and jobs. But those are an integral part of moving forward. So, we hear about these stats that you just presented, and it sounds like British Columbia is such an awful place that doesn't want to build relationships with First Nation communities, but it is happening. There are companies that are doing a great job at it. So there is an intentional part of that plan to move forward in how we work with people, how we communicate with people, how we include people, and ultimately how we build trust. So, in light of government policy and everything else that we rely so heavily on, companies that are making those decisions to move forward and build relationships are, meeting with some successes. And I think that's what we have to continue doing, and not kind of look at what everybody else is doing or what everybody else is not getting done, but really focus in on what am I doing and how am I opening myself up to potentially building relationships.
Now, Lenny, I know that you can't speak for all First Nations in the province, but is there a willingness to say, okay, let's figure this out together?
Oh, I think there is. I mean, we only have to look as far as the Tahltan and see all the wonderful things that they're doing in their territory. And I know it's not without, some challenges. But the thing is that they are moving ahead. They are creating an economy. They have been able to find a way to move forward. And I think that's what everybody deserves. Every First Nation deserves a chance to figure out how to move forward. And I think companies, industry, deserve a chance to figure out what that really means. And I think we have to, move forward on that level between company and communities.
So Cindy, we've talked that you're looking for the easiest route to market, but you're in that position right now where you're saying, okay, we're still actively looking. How important is it from your perspective that you find those relationships with First Nations and continue to move forward rather than just saying, okay, we're out of here?
Yeah, it's very important to our group. Capital operates around the globe, and they look to hire and manage and partner. We joint venture, we franchise in local communities. Here, our clients are very interested in our business model going forward. I spent the past few weeks traveling since coming back from vacation, and speaking to Indigenous First Nations corporations, just explaining our situation, our interest, our business, to see if there's interest in engaging with us as a partnership and a potential majority partnership in some of our locations. There are so many advantages to this. When you look at any business partnership, you go, what is the capacity? What is, the available market? We look at what are the supply chain partnerships and potential. And there's a lot of upside for us. And we hope that those that we're engaging feel the same way. So right now we're aggressively looking for business partners.
And this is in the pre-exploration process. You're saying, okay, let's build that partnership. Grant, from your perspective, how can you and your company, with your consulting services, help to facilitate, even at the early stage? I know that you get involved much further on down the line, but what is it that you bring to the equation that can help us find our way through this uncertain time right now as we're trying to figure out exactly what the rules of engagement are?
We typically, like in my role as a mining engineer doing consulting work, we often aren't engaging communities directly. Certainly have in former roles in my career. And I've been really encouraged by the amount of success that we've had with very simple engagement initiatives that they take time and patience. They don't necessarily take a lot of money. But building a relationship and building a certain level of trust and understanding. In our current role with my company, Fuse Advisors, we have some strong relationships with communities like the Nisga'a, where we're actually specifically providing assistance to them when they want to evaluate mining projects that are happening in their territory. And by working directly with them, sort of building a level of trust in the sort of the technical mining and environmental work that's going into these mining projects that companies want to develop within their territory.
So, Joe, you, in conversation with you go, it's important that there be these face-to-face interactions. Have we now started to put in place barriers that make having those face-to-face interactions a little bit more difficult?
Well, impossible probably now, because now the government's supposed to do it for you. And so you do not have that one-to-one relationship anymore, whereas before that was an integral part of doing work. I'm not only in British Columbia, all over the world. If you don't have that relationship, it's very hard to get access to the ground.
True.
Yeah,
and you can't do it right now.
It's not just a problem with British Columbia. These issues are global.
Yeah.
A lot of projects have been stopped because of it, but a lot of projects have been advanced because people have better relationships with certain groups. And I know of explorationists that when they have a relationship with one group, they'll just stake claims on that nation's ground. They won't go anywhere else because that relationship is basically their comparative advantage right now.
So, Todd, hang on just a second. Grant wanted to jump in here, and then Todd, I'm going to come to you.
I was just going to add that, certainly in my career, that first introduction when you're moving and you're trying to develop a project in a nation's territory, how you start that relationship is really key, and getting it started on the right foot. And so I thought Joe's comment was really interesting, where a lot of nations they appreciate when you reach out early and you engage. Really before you have to, because of any kind of regulatory process. Even I've had communities say that they appreciated that we reach out before we even staked any ground or something like that. So it's interesting under the new system that when you stake, if you want to stake claims, there's a consultation process that you're not a part of and you really have no visibility on. And you're just kind of hoping for a successful outcome and that you can sort of pick up the relationship at sort of the second step.
So that change, Todd, has come about because of DRIPA legislation. The courts read it, they interpreted it, that electronic staking interfered with that process. And yet, where are we at? And from your perspective and the association, how would you like the government to consider looking at DRIPA? Because it's a very touchy topic.
Well, first on the staking of claims, I mean, the Gatla decision was a decision of the Supreme Court, and it was very, very clear that the government needed to ensure that the staking of claims incorporated the necessary engagement and consultation with First Nations. So that's an important starting point. The government then went and built the Mineral Claims Consultation Framework, the MCCF. And the challenge, I think, is not the government's response to the court to the Gitgala decision, but the implementation of the system. Grant's quite right. There's, the consultation typically is arm's length from the individual or the company that staked the claim, and that they're pretty much in the dark. There's no commitment around timelines. And so that is in part, in addition to the removal of anonymity. Like I don't think we talk enough about the importance of anonymity in the claim staking process, but the MCCF sort of removed the anonymity. The combination of those factors resulted in a significant drop-off or decline in the number of claims being staked. I think we need to be very careful about, saying it's all about DRIPA, it's all about First Nations and whatnot. There's all kinds of reasons, for that drop off. So that's the MCCF piece. In terms of DRIPA, look, I'm very, very clear. I'm very transparent about my background. I was a legislator and MLA for almost 12 years. I was in the legislature in 2019 when DRIPA was brought before the legislature. I voted for it, as did every member of the legislature across all parties. All industry organizations endorsed it. And it was the right thing to do at that time, based on the undertakings of government, which are detailed in Hansard. DRIPA was to be an aspirational document, a set of principles that would guide, the relationship that should be in place between industry and First Nations. Fast forward to 2026, and DRIPA has become something quite a bit more than that. And I don't point the finger or fault First Nations. I think there have been some very significant implementation challenges that have been, that kind of rest at the feet of the provincial government. But at the end of the day, the courts in the most recent, in the Gitgala appeal recently, said, in a 2-to-1 decision, that this legislation and other legislation must be in alignment with the principles of UNDRIP. This calls into question, the legislative integrity of all of the acts and all of the laws of British Columbia.
Isn't the operative word there must? Wasn't
Must,
that added?
yes.
It must be in
Yes,
line with
yes.
the principles of UNDRIP.
Yes.
So how do you do that? UNDRIP's not a legal document.
That's absolutely correct. And so that is why at AME, two things I want to mention at this juncture. One is specific to DRIPA. We came to a very and we worked this through with our board over a number of months. But we after the Gitgala decision, we decided it was important to take the Premier and the government up at their word when they said they're going to substantively amend DRIPA to bring it back into alignment with its original intent. And that the province would be open to suggestions around what those legislative amendments would look like. We hired two of the best lawyers in this space in the country to draft those amendments, and in a very public, transparent way, we put that out in a letter to the Premier. And we encourage the Premier to use that language in those amendments if he sees fit, but those amendments represent a substantive the substantive amendments required to bring DRIPA back to its original intent. And the goal here is to get the courts out of the business of actually creating law and policy through the interpretation of the legislation as it exists today. The saddest part of all of this is that First Nations are taking it on the chin as a bit of a lightning rod, and that's not fair.
No, it's not fair.
It's not fair. And so the last thing I want to say on this is that we're proud at AME that we're the only industry association that has developed what we call the Indigenous Engagement Toolkit, and it's a very detailed guidebook of best practices for explorers, for our members, on how to do those initial outreaches, how to build those relationships with First Nations and so forth. It's very, very well received by First Nations, very popular with our members, and it's why, actually, notwithstanding all the noise about DRIPA, there are more exploration agreements being negotiated earlier on between First Nations and industry than ever before. So there's actually good work happening, and that's because of the good intentions of explorers and the good intentions of First Nations to find some common ground, notwithstanding the conversation around DRIPA.
And so, in other words, it doesn't have to be legislated. People want to do this.
And it was said earlier, yes, it was said earlier, it becomes a competitive advantage for us in British Columbia if we can find a path where a First Nation and industry is working together as early in that process as possible. I'll give you an example. North Isle Copper in Port Hardy. Take a look at how they are doing their business. They have a phenomenal relationship with the Quatsino First Nations there. And they have them involved in every facet of that operation, and everybody is rowing in the same direction at the same pace. That project has strong management, great First Nations engagement, obviously phenomenal geology and so forth. So this is possible and it is happening. And frankly, I think we need to talk more about the success stories and highlight the examples of where industry and First Nations are actually collaborating proactively and coming together and finding common ground.
Cindy.
Yeah, with respect to looking back, not too far, not too long, we reflected on DRIPA a little bit, but we look at the political process, we look at the law, we look at the intent. So things I heard from Todd, we don't know what we don't know. We know a lot more now. We also know that the law is a bit of a cultural artifact, I like to argue. And so that can create a sense of unfairness. So yeah, maybe, it's the legislation we put in place is maybe not appropriate. How do we find our way forward? I think more involvement in the process, more diverse approach in the community. I think something like that. But
it's really easy for us to point the finger at DRIPA right now and say, oh, that's what's holding us up. But I think that if you take a look at the layering on of processes and permitting, and it's much more than that. It is systemic within government. Just before I come to this, I've got a clip from Kayvon at Newmont Mines from a session that we had about a year ago. Arav, can you run that clip, please?
BC is it's a Goldilocks zone and a Goldilocks moment, I like to say, because there's a surge in demand for critical minerals. But it's important to think about the full continuum of mining as well. And starting with exploration and prospectors that actually create the feedstock of projects that then turn into mining, and making sure that those single asset companies or that are perhaps more in the earlier phases of that mining continuum are also treated with the same expedience or priority as the major projects. Because if we don't have a thriving exploration and prospecting industry, we don't have mines to build.
And there it is, isn't it? Grant?
Oh, I certainly agree. I mean, I think, and other folks here would know the stats better than me, but I think the funnel of projects, you need hundreds, thousands of greenfield projects just to find one that can carry its weight economically for the $500 billion that you need to build a new mine nowadays. And so it's kind of a numbers game. We need to be able to get on the ground and explore lots of projects that likely won't go anywhere. But we'll get there, we'll sample the soil, and do some modeling, maybe drill some holes. But it's not very often that you find a new Gibraltar or a new Blackwater. And so you need to get out and break lots of rocks to do that.
Lana.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't lose heart in this province or in this country when I start hearing negative comments about DRIPA and ultimately Indigenous people and what we desire in this life. But I just want to tell you a funny story. Last year I went to an event at the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, and if you haven't, you should, because it really opens your mind and your heart up to Indigenous cultural history in this province. But it was a family day, and there were lots of people there, and I was standing beside this family, a young couple, and their two little kids, and the little daughter, 5 years old, blonde curly hair, all emotionally upset. And she was saying, why can't we be Indigenous? And, you know, it warmed my heart because I thought, this is the direction we're going in. People are changing. People are seeing me as an Indigenous person perhaps differently than they might have 20, 30 years ago. And even in industry, you know, I was on the board of AME for quite some time a few years ago, and now I'm on the board of PDAC. And I just see amazing changes in people and people's attitudes. And it's it's changing our country, it's changing our hearts, and I think that's where it begins. And when we're facing 2026 and, you know, what might happen this year, there was a lot of encouragement from a lot of people across this country to be kind. And I think it's opening up our hearts. Maybe, you know, for some that's still a ways away because you're still going through that cerebral kind of understanding. But I think eventually anything intentional helps you to move towards making this country who we can become, and certainly partnering and working with Indigenous people from a company level, I think will really move this country forward in who we are as a superpower, as the government of Canada wants us to be seen, and as our Canadian citizens want us to be seen. So I encourage you to leave here today with an open mind and an open heart.
I would agree with you. You know, when we give everybody the opportunity to realize their full potential, nations and individuals, we all benefit. And so I think that there is a collective understanding that we want to work together. As I'm now wanting to delve into the layering on of challenges that exist within the bureaucracy of permitting, going back to Kayvon's point, don't just give that focus to the big projects. We have to focus on explorers. And if we don't give them that opportunity, I'm going to go to Joe and then I'll come to you, okay, Todd? But Joe, like, what's the capacity to be able to raise money for your projects if you're talking to potential financiers who are going, okay, but British Columbia has this reputation?
And potentially deservedly so. What I would say is that 2025 exploration expenditures in BC will probably be higher than 2024, but that's probably despite itself. It should be much higher than that. What's going to happen in 2026 is probably the staking level will drop precipitously. So we're not talking about companies that raise money in British Columbia, but they've raised more money. But the people that have got the money are almost like the haves, because they have security of tenure, they're advancing advanced projects. It's not the grassroots explorers. Most of the people I know that formally explore in British Columbia are not doing it. And that's how money leaves. It's not a lot of money. They don't need a lot of money. But the problem is that if it takes 6 months to 9 months to get the ground, and you have to give them the money, and they hold your money during that 6 to 9 months, nobody's going to give you money to do that. And then you have this window of exploration, and if you miss it, and you did flow through, you're screwed. So you're going to take that money and do it somewhere else. And that's what's happening.
Is it that you're going to take that money and go somewhere else, or is it the investor's going to go somewhere else?
Well, a company will go where the investors will give him money to, unless he's private. And he could do it for a long time, and he's got much of a longer horizon, but a lot of people are public, and they need to ride the cycle. Right now, it's a positive commodity cycle, and there should be, there's really no excuse for more exploration to happen in British Columbia.
So if the investor and the company go somewhere else, we lose twice.
Well, these people are not cash flowing entities, so
Right.
They need the investors. If the investor doesn't exist, they don't exist.
Right.
Next.
Todd's chomping at the bit, then Cindy.
Yeah, no, really quick. So the numbers, the total spend on exploration, the numbers were announced by the Premier this morning in his speech, and I think it was somewhere around $750 million for last year. So that's up, significantly over the previous year. But Joe's absolutely right. The story behind the story is that those dollars are massively concentrated in representative projects of the large companies, well-developed projects. When you dive into the numbers, and we're doing that right now, and I can tell you this is what we'll end up putting something out about this in the next short number of days. The smaller projects, the prospecting community are struggling like they haven't struggled before. Anecdotally, we hear every other week about another prospecting family, a third or fourth generation prospector, who is saying to his or her kids, we're telling the kids they're not carrying on the family tradition of prospecting anymore because we can't make a go of it. I mean, that should break our hearts. Every single mine, this was the whole point of our Minerals for Tomorrow campaign, which we launched this morning at our opening ceremonies in my keynote address. We have got to get governments focused from a policy and a regulatory perspective on the permitting challenges, on the access to land challenges, and the certainty issues. All have to happen in conjunction with one another, and there has to be a predominant focus on the prospecting community and the early exploration community. If we don't do this and do it quickly, we're going to see some good projects move forward in the Golden Triangle and a few other parts. No question, there'll be 2, 3, 4 projects. There is nothing coming in behind. Like it'll be 10 or 15 years, and we won't have any net new projects coming on. That's the big worry. And by the way, we think that British Columbia, even though we're at $750 million-ish in exploration dollars last year, it sounds like we have fallen below Saskatchewan into the number 4th spot. And nothing against Saskatchewan, love Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's awesome. Yeah, my whole family's from Saskatchewan. But there is no world in which British Columbia should be behind Saskatchewan when it comes to total spend on exploration. So that's an indictment on the current policy and regulatory landscape in the province, and it's the work that we are laser focused on with government.
Well, and as Kayvon points out, we run the risk of losing this Goldilocks moment because it exists. Cindy.
Exactly. It's, Mr. Carney said feed and defend to set the stage, because in this new world order, we need to be competitive and we need to be self-sustaining. And as a province, we have a wealth from which we can benefit. And, Joe was talking about feeding our pipeline. So what is our pipeline of opportunity? Where does it come from? It comes from the prospectors. It comes from the junior explorationists and, the families who've been doing this for some time. So, when you take that away, really, what are you building up to? So, I have sales teams, and I always tell my team, okay, how do you fill your pipeline? You get in touch with people, outreach, education, build relationships, and when you do that, people naturally want to work with you, ideally. So when that happens, you move them along, right? Move them along the exploration process, for example. So, junior, we're developing, sometimes it changes hands. Interested parties who are more competent in the late stage come in and help us out. Yes, sometimes that comes from Australia, or sometimes it's internal here. But, really in the end, if we don't have that, we have the young people saying, you know what, this is kind of off and on. I'm going to go live in Australia and take my master's over there, and we all lose. The feed and defend is everybody who lives inside our borders, and we want to be a better trade partner. So if we want to be, competitive, and we go to the world to find our new partners, we have to have something to bring to the table, or who wants to talk to us, right?
So who's standing in the way, Cindy? We're talking about people, and we want to point the finger only at government, but
I think we can't do that. It's a community, and we're all in this. It's all of us. We have been not very competitive for quite some time. We're all asleep. Mr. Carney would like to see us wake up. So we all participate. So whether it's encouraging young people and mentoring them into their roles in the supply chain. And I don't just mean geology, I mean everything that supports it, because there's a huge base under that iceberg that supports the industry. So we need to feed chemists, we need, all kinds of things, right? Engineers. And, we also need to, help represent our society in a better way. So we go out with the best intention, to be competitive, further society, educate our families and friends, who we are, the Minerals for Tomorrow, things like that. So I think it's an example, it's a start, but whether you're a geologist who needs to go out to PDAC and speak to all the new technology companies, there's one way to shorten the timeline, right? So there's more things. Be a little more outward, community-minded, and community-oriented to help move together as suppliers and as geoscientists and promoters and the investment community. We need to work together.
And what about innovators? I mean, we've got some pretty good brains in British Columbia. We've got an incredibly high level of education. We keep hearing about this all the time. We invent things in British Columbia. I know Sue Page from Digital at times gets frustrated about the programs that they help to support and find that they find markets outside of British Columbia for BC technology that they can't sell in BC. I'm going to go to one more clip here from Kim Lawrence at Ideon. This is a technology that they have invented here in British Columbia, working off of research that was done at Triumph out at UBC. Arav, can you please run that clip for me?
I hear often that people think that geology is a dying science or a quieting science, so there's less folks going into the industry. So I'm a very optimistic person.
That's not Kim.
So I do hope that we continue to do mineral exploration and it becomes
We are a spin-out of Triumph, the particle physics lab at UBC. Proudly born in BC, proudly grown in BC. Sometimes I'm asked, why are you still in BC? Which I find a little offensive because I don't think we'll ever leave. But we use the energy from supernova explosions in outer space to image beneath the Earth's surface.
Are those cosmic rays?
Those are cosmic rays,
All right.
and we use a very specific subatomic particle called a muon that helps us measure density in the subsurface. And it feels sometimes like our province is complacent. If you look around us, you look across the border, you see how fast things are moving. We're doing more innovation outside Canada than we are inside. We're working with the biggest companies in Australia. We're working with companies in Ontario. We're working with companies in Indonesia. But we're not doing it at home. And there's a reason why. And part of that is, I think, a reluctance to take a chance on something. And when you talk about prospectors, sort of really early stage, they're going to market for funding to fund one drill hole in some cases. And when we come to them and we say, we could help you extensively once you have one drill hole, they're like, well, do I either do that or do I do one drill hole? So the decisions that they're making are pretty substantial. I would love to see a scenario where we're banding together to support prospectors in sort of early stage, where perhaps there is an initiative where we bring all of the BC mining tech to bear on the challenges that they face, and that there's some kind of incentive to adopt new technology that will ultimately help them transition to a newer way of doing what they're doing now.
Thank you. Kim, Grant, your response, what do you, when you hear Kim?
I've certainly heard it a few times over the last couple of weeks even that that new technologies have to leave Canada in order to be successful in Canada. So I certainly agree that some sort of mechanism or policy change that supports exploiting those or making that more accessible for prospectors who maybe aren't familiar with it or can't afford it, or they feel like they've got to choose between their tried and tested drill hole if they can just get that one intercept, that they know they can raise money on that. But say something like muon sensors, that's something that's novel and maybe the market might not be as familiar with. They see that as a big risk.
Cindy? And then Joe, I'll come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked in bringing technologies to market in Mexico, Canada, US, and Australia. And I think there needs to be a cultural support. We have a long line of management. Boots on the ground is important, right? But it's also important to have the space and be outwardly investigative to really know the available technologies, to really understand, if they can enhance, your work, right? So, but also, we have an investment community that is taught to understand, well, I want to pay for drill holes in the ground, and that's where it stops, right? So it's hard to pay for other things as well, so it's difficult to cover. So there's a few layers of this to unpack. So there's education, investor education, and there's a mindset and culture as well. So you'll see different companies approach culture more readily. But also on the provider side, I would say you really need to back your client up. So those internal champions of technology, you really need to help them and help them get their point across and the ROI, the return on investment. So it's part of it.
Joe, and then Todd, I've got a question for you about this. Joe?
Well, like specifically with IDEON, but I can talk about a bunch of technologies that the problem with a lot of the, not the problem, the technologies are not, you can't apply it to every project. IDEON specifically needs a very big density contrast and a certain type of deposit it works better with than deposits where the country rock and the deposit, the SG is not very different. It doesn't help you much. And also they're finding that working for producing companies with big block caves, they're finding that they can find stuff that they have in mind better than they could drill for it. So that's a huge advantage and be a big moneymaker for them that they find, more so than exploration. But they are working with fireweed, and they talk about that one a lot. But again, for an explorer to go to an investor and say, I'm going to get you a density anomaly, great. What does that mean? I mean, I can do it with gravity, I can do it with a lot of other things. Is that the most cost-effective way of doing it, or just drill the bloody hole? It's usually drill the bloody hole. So, that's right. So you really need, like also leaching copper. You know, leaching copper with sulfide's huge, because if you can avoid the smelters and make cathode at home, it's huge. But again, it doesn't work with every project because some of that bacteria might not like your project. You know, and so there's certain styles of deposit it works on, and we can find those, but it's not blanket or AI application to everything. You know, and that's another.
No one size fits all.
Yeah, there are people, venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, that believe AI would just sort out the entire mining industry because they can't believe it takes 15, 20 years between discovery to actually get something into production. I mean, they just look at it and they go, idiots. Let's just take somebody else and go through it. We can collapse that down to 3 to 5. They'll find out that won't work. But they'll spend another $350 million before they prove it to themselves.
Todd.
Well, I don't have too much more to add to what's already been said. I will just say this, like two things. One, there actually is a tremendous core sort of cluster of technology, early stage startup and early stage companies like you here in BC that are developing technologies specific to mineral exploration and mining. That's not the problem. The challenge, and this goes with across the whole technology spectrum. And I was in the technology business with my company for 15 years. It was the same back then as it is now. We are really, 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 really good and efficient at coming up with ideas and starting companies in British Columbia. It all starts to fall down at a certain size of operation, just regardless of the sector that we're talking about. And getting to that mid-size and that larger size, we really struggle as a province, and we have for decades. And so there's
across multiple sectors.
That's a whole other segment of Conversations Live. But like what do we have to do differently to actually help these companies scale? Because whatever we've tried to this point just hasn't worked. My own company, my exit was with a New York firm. It pained me to do it at the time, but that was the trajectory of it was the best deal for our shareholders and so forth. We see the same thing in the mining tech space here in British Columbia. No sector is exactly the same, but I'm just saying we do struggle in this province to actually grow the companies to scale.
Is that a BC thing, Lana, and then Cindy?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment. I'm not an innovation expert by any stretch, but I went to a talk in Toronto, and it was delivered by a colleague of mine, Michelle Ash, who those of you who are in the mining sector would know her. She's from Australia. And I was curious, and I managed to have a chat with her afterwards, and I asked, can innovation exist without community? can innovation be successful without community? And she said, absolutely not. And being an industry expert, I've taken that with me and realized that, we have these great ideas and we want to bring them to market, but sometimes we're not having these conversations with community. So the local community in that particular area, it doesn't always have to be an Indigenous community. It could be a town that's nearby a mine. But, if the general public can grasp how much different it could be from an environmental standpoint or from a cost standpoint in the long run, they may be eager to see innovation take place on the ground where they are.
Cindy.
I just kind of wanted to wrap a bit of this together. The past few weeks coming up to this panel, I've had some discussions with different stakeholders. People are involved in different parts of the process. Today I had a conversation with somebody in the permitting office. If there's anything we could do to move our permitting timelines around, what would it be? And she said, well, she said, there's a lot. But first thing would be read the instructions, fill out the paper. Don't just fill out the necessary, the mandatory, fill out everything. Don't send me an investor presentation. I'm going to get to a point here. She says, send me exactly what I ask you because I'm not a geologist. So there's a process there on that side, And then there's another layer. So they recently had a software contract implemented from a company in Texas who built a layer of something that collects information. And I guess this is something that's actually holding back the permitting staff. So from her side, she says, well, we just brought extra people on and now we got to bring more people on. And so that was her side. And then I spoke to the government geologists, right? And they said, we need to share more, right? We're a community, we need to share more. Where's the sharing of the data? Where, we have how much geochemistry, for example, that's locked up in a vault somewhere? Sharing that, being more open and sharing the innovations that we're using, right? And then, you'll speak to junior exploration, and we've well covered, things from their point of view. How do you bring all this together, right? And then, we talked about the laws that are, somewhat cultural artifacts, and so they're not necessarily representing all of us here who have to feed and defend the country together, So how do we work on this together? It's a big issue, and we set our politicians up for failure. We give them short timelines. We create reactivity because of our demands. Our rah-rah moments as people who say, this is what I want. And, we have a cyclical mining, we have cyclical commodity prices. So, there's a lot of things at play here, and we point a lot of fingers. So I just really feel that we need to look at a systems view of this, a more holistic approach together as a community.
So I want to play the clip from Grace that came up a little bit earlier, because she's a young woman who is entering the exploration field, and she's enthusiastic. So it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, we've got people who are looking to be a part of what the future will be. Can you play that clip from Grace, please, Arav?
I hear often that people think that geology is a dying science or a quieting science, so there's less folks going into the industry. I'm a very optimistic person, so I do hope that we continue to do mineral exploration and it becomes a growing industry once again. Although if not, I do know that Australia is a very good place to also do some mineral exploration.
Ouch. Ouch. That's not what we want to hear, is it? What do you say to her to say, no, we want you to stay here? Because we need mines like yours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I met Grace at the mining day in the legislature before Christmas. I think it was in November. And she was volunteering at the Vancouver Exploration Group's booth, second-year geology student. And I started talking to her, and she is just so excited. Like her enthusiasm and passion for geology is infectious. I told the story in my keynote this morning, but like she was laughing that her dad's looking forward to her finishing her degree and moving out because he's tired of fixing the washing machine because of all the rocks that she leaves in her pockets, right? Like this, she just loves this space. But she was talking about, because I would ask her, well, why? She said, well, I get to work outside. You know, I get to literally be an explorer. Like I'm looking for something, and that's exciting. You know, she thinks that it would just be a great, you know, the satisfaction from all that hard work and effort and so forth that, you know, would be really rewarding. So it's like we all have an obligation to you know, talk to our young, our children, our grandchildren, whatnot, to encourage them about the opportunities in the space. So you know, like that there is a lot of upside. But it always comes back to we have to make sure that the government policy in particular, when it comes to access to land and permitting and, you know, all of those supports that like the conditions that need to be there for prospectors and, you know, geologists, people doing early exploration, the conditions have to be conducive to setting them up for success. And that's not the case right now. And I give you one example, Stu. You know, when we talk about access to land, the province of British Columbia has an initiative called 30 by 30, and that's to set aside 30% of British Columbia, you know, as conservation areas by 2030. Well, you know, that's a lot of land. And I think, you know, was said earlier, like you have to actually explore a heck of a lot of territory before you find anything. And you still may never find anything, right? But 30 by 30. So AME, we decided to do our own analysis, and we had some experts help us with this. When you actually take the provincial parks and official conservation areas, yeah, you're somewhere between 17 and 20%. So the province believes they still have to get from 20% to 30%. When you actually layer in all the, you know, the wildlife management areas, the endangered species areas, the this, the that, the this, the that, it just goes on and on. The province is actually, we already have 47% of our landmass set aside with some degree of conservation or restriction, meaning explorers can't access that land. For example, there's a certain herds of caribou. The government says, well, that's not a conservation area because you can explore between the months of like December through to March. Well, this is like a high mountain pass area. Like, no one is exploring during those months. You can't do it, right? So it's locked off. So our definition at AME is a very practical one, is if you can't access that land, no matter what the restriction is, it's off limits, right? So we pushed back hard with the government. I said to the Premier in one of my first meetings, I said, Premier, I want to celebrate your success on 30 by 30, because you've actually accomplished 47 by 25. So can we now start having a conversation about pulling some land back, you know, into the inventory for explorers to actually, you know, do their jobs?
How'd that go over?
He has directed the staff in the Walrus Ministry to go back and look at all their numbers and to sit down with us, which they are now, you know, going through what this actually looked like. So I'll believe it when I see it, but I mean, we have to push back on this. If there's no access to land, if we keep chipping away at it, you're going to snuff out the prospecting community. And you do that, like I said earlier, you're not going to have the mines of the future because you're not doing the exploration today.
Cindy.
So we have to approach this with a longer term mindset, so not political term mindset. So, you know, in looking at the longer term, I mean, you know, you can go in and explore, and then maybe you have an open pit, and then you have caribou migration. So, you know, really, what is the long-term plan to be able to, exploit those resources, right? And if you're going to allow the exploration, we want to make sure we don't set up the exploration success with, you know, development failure, because you can't actually get to the mining phase. So how do we make this a really long-term successful approach, right? So
I have one more clip from another enthusiastic young woman who is working in the sector right now, and then I'm going to come back to all of you and ask you, what's one thing that you would like to see change in the next 6 to 8 months? Arv, can you play Natasha's clip, please?
There's been conversations about putting I think it's a moratorium on mining in certain regions of the province. And that's definitely made it more difficult for us to explore in those regions and more limiting into where we can do our exploration work. So I think just increasing the conversation around mineral exploration could definitely help.
It can definitely help, and that's what, of course, we're doing. We can't walk away from mineral exploration, especially at this critical time where we need these essential minerals and elements for a green economy. So, Grant, I'm going to start with you. What's one thing that you would like to see change? Because we're going to wrap up on this from each of you.
Yeah, it's a bit of a laundry list, so trying to boil it down, but I think when I think about what I'd like to see change is developing a high level of certainty in all of these activities, whether it be permitting, engagement, all these things. The more certainty we have, the easier it'll be to go to the capital market and raise some money, and you'll be able to keep your promises to all the folks that are cutting checks. So I think a high degree of certainty, be it policy, be it all these other things we've talked about today.
Joe.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that would be for, but I mean, personally, I don't really care. Because I can put my money anywhere until they get their proverbial sorted out. I'll keep investing otherwise, just like everybody else.
But you'll invest
Yeah,
elsewhere.
I'm not going to change the government until I can vote. But other than that, I mean, they're going to screw it up for themselves. I mean, and that point about politicians, you can't blame them, but I mean, they go out of their way to do this. I mean, the problem is that they put these policies forward without actually understanding how to execute them, and then we have to live with it. I mean, there should have been a simulation or some kind of discussion about how this will actually work. And also building a capacity in the government to actually do that part about doing the consultation. Because it's not just the indigenous groups, it's actually who is actually doing the consultation. How much do they, spend going to the groups? Do they have the capacity to do that? I mean, we have problems with people just looking at tailings. Imagine that to the nth degree about looking at every exploration claim block.
All right. Todd.
Well, I not to pile on, but certainty, and because that is the foundation for into which all of these challenges get plugged, and that's how you move forward with confidence. So, certainty in being able to access land, more land, not less land. A certainty in a permitting process that's predictable. A certainty in the who has the final say on things. When I was at the Precious Metals Summit down in Beaver Creek a number of months ago, listening to investors, there were 18 junior mining companies from BC. There were all these investors. It was like a Dragon's Den sort of on steroids for 4 days. It was it was very interesting. The themes from the investors were British Columbia has great geology. They have talented workforce. Infrastructure is pretty good. Power. On the negative side, it was the permitting timeframe is off the charts, ridiculously long and costly. Worse than that, the rules can often change midstream, which is true. And thirdly, who the heck is actually in charge and has the final decision at the end of the day? No one really knows. Like, the world is watching. So all of that, the access to land, the permitting, and the decision making, it all needs to be resolved so that we have maximum certainty going forward, because the capital will go, in many other choices around the world.
Lana.
Okay, I've had a few minutes to think about what I might say. I'm looking at the time, and I don't have a lot of time. But I'm gonna throw in a wrench here, only because I really think this is really important. Is that whole world of inclusion is so important, and I think if we can become more inclusive as an industry, and I say that because I had an interesting conversation the other night with a friend of mine, and we were talking about today's generation, the young kids coming up in school who are studying to be geologists and or mining engineers and such. And there's a big issue out there about people identifying who they are, whether they're transsexual, bisexual, transgender, I meant to say. But there is a whole group of people that may not necessarily feel anything for our industry because maybe in turn we don't feel anything for them. So, I've always been on the side of including Indigenous people, and I still am. But I realize that in that sort of my plight, it doesn't include everybody because I'm focused on Indigenous people being Indigenous. But I think, if we're going to captivate some of this brain drain that you're talking about, and if we're going to move forward with youth having careers in our industry, we do have to become more open. And from what I can see, which is not very well, but there's a lot of people in this room who are on the older side. So they might be going, oh, what the hell is she talking about? But I think for those of you who are young in this room, you understand what I'm talking about. And I'd still like to think that I'm on the younger side, although someone might have to tell me the truth. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. It's just food for thought, but go away from here thinking like, how can I be more open-minded and more open-hearted towards people in this province?
Cindy?
I think each and every one of us as individuals, instead of looking to the collective as being responsible, I think the individuals need to say, who can I mentor? What is the story I want to share? What would be my legacy in the industry? And I think, how can we, if you meet somebody from natural resource and critical metals, and you sit down and have a conversation, they work in the permitting department, say, hey, how is it? How is it for you? How is it? We're all kind of a little bit focused on what we do as individuals. I think we just need to look to our community. We probably learn a lot, and what we don't know is what we don't know, like I said earlier, and it's the one way to actually come together and figure this thing out.
So a comment from one of our online viewers is, thank you for having this conversation. It goes back to conversation. We have to keep having this conversation because, as the sign says here, mineral exploration supports Canadian jobs, talent, and entrepreneurs. Talk to your family, neighbors, friends, and elected officials about the need for Canadian mineral exploration. We all have a responsibility to share how important it is. Thank you to everybody on our panel. Panelists, I want you to know that in the blue bags there that you have the your own coveted Conversations Live mug. And please, thank you. It's an expression of thank you for taking the time to be on this panel. And thank you for joining us here in person and online. And join us again in just a couple of weeks on February the 10th when we have our mayor's panel. We have 7 mayors in British Columbia talking about the issues that they will be facing. Thank you very much. Thanks to our panel. Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.